Before Parliament took its summer break, the new Liberal government, led by Prime Minister Mark Carney, introduced and passed a number of important pieces of legislation. Bill C-5, the so-called One Canadian Economy Act, was passed into law, while Bill C-2, the Strong Borders Act, received first reading. Canadians have reacted strongly to both bills, and our next guest says there is a reason for that. David Leis is president of the Frontier Centre for Public Policy and the host of Leaders on the Frontier. David, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
So let's start with, I think, the most contentious of the two bills, Bill C-2, Strong Borders Act, as they call it. Government says this will help law enforcement keep pace with the changing criminal landscape, but it certainly seems to be an infringement on lots of different areas of our privacy. Just maybe give me your thoughts, your overview on C-2.
Well, C2 is very mixed. Clearly, we need help on our border situation in Canada, Rod. We need to be able to secure it. We need to ensure that it's operating as a border. But this bill, I think, does a lot of other things that frankly undermine basic rights and freedoms for people. When the bill is extensive in terms of being able to look at all kinds of information that are no longer protected under the bill in terms of a warrant. And I think this is a fundamental problem when it comes to exercising due process. And I think this should worry all Canadians. Um, but beyond that, in all fairness to the bill, it seeks to try to bring some important remedies in terms of getting at how organized crime, where we have a lot of challenges in this country where we have all the familiar suspects here in Canada, from cartels to all kinds of money laundering schemes, to name just a few. So this goes in part to that, but it also compromises, I think, due process in terms of the legal rights and freedoms for Canadians.
Yeah, we'll get to the cartel money laundering part of that in just a minute. I want to stop first and just touch on really quickly kind of some of the civil liberties parts. In terms of the surveillance powers, and you mentioned warrants, law enforcement would basically be able to access subscriber information, personal information online, unique identifiers, transmission data, and would be able to access this without warrants. That's kind of frightening in terms of the amount of time people are spending online these days.
I agree. I think that this is going down the wrong path. It would basically provide open season for governments to be able to see anything that Canadians are doing. And our digital footprints in this day and age in 2025 are huge. So therefore, there would be no privacy. And I think this is a huge problem when it comes to basic due process, when it comes to civil liberties, Rod, as you said. So what needs to happen is that those parts of the bill need to be amended. I think that it is simply unacceptable in this country to accept that kind of compromise of due process. That has been a tradition for some 150 years in Canada, if not longer. When you look back at the Anglo-Saxon tradition goes back hundreds of years, is you have the right to privacy, and you have a right to have to go through a warrant process. I mean, this is just foundational to our law. And I think if we compromise this, we are frankly compromising the fundamental foundation of what makes the rule of law in this country.
All right, let's get to the dollars and cents, the money side of this, and the tools that the government says is giving law enforcement to deal with, the drug trade, money laundering, but as they say, the devil's in the details. Let's talk about the $10,000 limit on cash donations. Explain that. What's most shocking here in terms of how the government's moving forward on the amount of money we can donate?
I think this is absurd. To be able to put a $10,000 limit on cash makes no sense. It really raises legitimate suspicions about why is there this effort to keep moving us towards a digitization of currency. And I think this is where Canadians should be concerned. We need to preserve, I believe, in my opinion, cash transactions because it is private and it allows us to be able to go about our business in a way that enables us to do what we want to do, but to be able to insert a kind of a limit of $10,000 begs the question, when is it going to be lowered from 10 to 5 to $1,000 or even less? And this is what we've seen in other societies. I think we only have to look at the Communist Party of China in terms of how they regulate human behavior in that country, where they have a kind of a digital mapping of everybody's behaviors, and this is well documented. So I think that um, part of this has also got to be seen, I think, Rod, in the context of what happened a number of years ago during the truckers' convoy, where you had a government do, frankly, the unthinkable in the Western world. And this is what made waves across the world in terms of a government that actually started freezing people's bank accounts. And I think that many of us would never believe that was going to happen. But in that context, they did it. So this is not a theoretical proposition. So that's why this legislation is so worrisome, is that it's uh, uh, the endless step towards the digitization of money, the tracking of people, and the breakdown of privacy and the rule of law is very concerning.
I've already had somebody in law enforcement, former police officer, tell me that, criminals are already ahead of the curve on this anyway. They don't do transactions in the sense of something that's trackable. Once you're over $10,000, that can trigger a FinTrack response where it's tracked and watched by law enforcement. So they already know if you put $9,999, you can get around that the FinTrack look at that transaction.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In many respects, this will do nothing to stop the criminal rackets that are in this nation. What it will do is stop the little guy, ultimately. And that is where the gathering of information is very concerning. And I think the onus that this bill also puts on internet providers is very concerning. And so that will inevitably, if this bill is passed, create a business platform, because providers will want to stay in business, that will be set up to systematically provide this information if they're asked by the government. And we can't go down this pathway. This would just simply compromise us on too many fronts, not the which is legally, but also it will not make a difference when it comes to criminal activity, I believe.
And we should mention the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms has started a petition, so Canadians can certainly sign up on that if they're concerned. Let's talk about C-5 for a moment, the One Canadian Economy Act. The government talking about giving quicker approvals to nation-building projects, as they call them, but we're also hearing the Prime Minister talk about the need for consensus before these projects can proceed. Is Prime Minister Carney talking out of both sides of his mouth here?
Well, it appears to be. I think this is where we need clear direction on the pathway, the policy prescriptions that are being offered by this government to get Canada moving again. We all know that the last 10 years plus, this country has been in economic stagnation. The GDP figures prove it, where our per capita growth has been very low, if not like 1.5%, according to the International Monetary Fund. But we have a situation where we've got to get things built in this country, whether it's pipelines, whether it's infrastructure to all kinds of fronts, whether it's being able to incisively move our energy to international markets. I mean, there's a whole host of things that we've got to get done in this country. And with the myriad of legislation, we have a serious problem where we can't build things in this country. It takes too long. Witness the project of Trans Mountain Pipeline, where the government had to ultimately take it over at huge cost to be able to get that project done. But Rod, we have another problem, and that is that without clarity on our ability to get things done, we have the problem where private capital is sitting on the sidelines. We have an outflow of money moving out of this country. It's been some $400 billion the last 10 years alone. So we are not seen as a place to do business. We're seen as frankly, a lot of our jurisdictions are seen as hostile to business, and that's part of the reason why people's standard of living is well, stagnated. We also see a situation where people they're struggling with their standard of living. So we have an opportunity to get this country going, but C5 is really an interim answer.
We saw the deal that Alberta and Ontario signed this week to remove some interprovincial trade barriers and work more closely on energy priorities. Does that put pressure on the federal Liberals to play along, do you think?
I think that announcement does put pressure on the federal government to get with the program and to be able to answer some pretty clear responses to some really basic questions, like why is it that we continue to have legislation in place like Bill C-69 or the tanker ban on the West Coast? I mean, there's really basic things that the federal government could answer to move again private capital from the sidelines into moving this country forward. The whole approach to net zero is still a problem. So as long as we have kind of a grayness or indecision, I think the real issue is that governments are prescribing legislation that is still not going to release private capital to invest in this country and get it moving.
Do you expect we'll see this in court at some point, or is there going to be constitutional challenges to C-5?
I think ultimately you will see constitutional challenges simply because there are so many challenges that this bill uncovers, one of which is existing legislation is still in place that empowers, I think, a lot of special interests to say that they can, if they don't have their day in Parliament, they will have their day in court. So I think that could end to, create another long list of time wasting and diversions that will ultimately again not enable this country to move forward. And I would say that this is a very important window this fall to see how we come to a resolution on a lot of these key questions. And I think that's where Canada is really at that perennial fork in the road.
David, I know we'll talk again, I'm sure, in the future about more of these public policies, and that is your area of expertise. We appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Good to be here.
David Leis, president of the Frontier Centre for Public Policy and the host of Leaders on the Frontier.